Sorry about that. I started talking when I was muted. It is now 7 minutes past the hour. Thank you all for coming. We are going to begin the event. Let me briefly explain the format, and then we'll get started. We will have two pairs of conversations, two conversations tonight. One conversation with the people who are running for seat 13 of Superior Court judge. They are Judge Thompson, who is the current incumbent, and Jean Roland, who is the challenger. That conversation will run for roughly 40 minutes or so, 45 minutes. We will then have a parallel or sort of a repeat conversation, as it were, with Judge Begert, and who is the incumbent, and his challenger, Chip Zecher. They are on screen, they are muted, and their cameras are off. They are watching and listening, or perhaps not, it's totally up to them, but they will not be participating until the second half of this event, which will begin in roughly 40 minutes. I will begin in just a moment. When I begin, I will ask each of the participants to give a brief explanation, brief background on themselves, and then I will be asking a question and give each one of them an opportunity to answer the same question, and we'll just go through roughly probably 5, 6, 7 questions like that. Hopefully we'll have a good conversation. We intend this to be interactive with the candidates. So without any further ado, thank you both for coming. Judge Thompson, let me begin with you. Could you please give us a background about yourself and your role?
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for hosting us, Patrick. We really appreciate the work that you're doing to spread the word about what we do as judges in San Francisco Superior Court. My journey was that I started out in the Midwest, but I've lived and worked in San Francisco for the past 30 years. After growing up in the Midwest, I went to University of Michigan undergraduate and then went to Harvard Law School. Drawn by the nice weather of San Francisco, I moved here and have lived and worked here ever since. And I started out working downtown and worked at a firm that was known as Pillsbury, Madison, and Sutro. Was in the last partnership class of the firm by that name and worked in that firm and did a lot of different types of litigation. And within a few years, I was head of their antitrust group nationally. After that, I went to a couple of other firms and I spent 30 years working in civil law in private practice. While I was doing that, I also did other things in various bar associations at the state, federal level and as well with the Bar Association of San Francisco. While I was doing that, I also worked with several significant nonprofits in the city, including chairing the board of California Pacific Medical Center. I was on the board of the American Conservatory Theater for 20 years, including time on their executive committee, and chaired their MFA board. I also chaired the board of Grace Cathedral and chaired the board of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights of the San Francisco Bay Area. After doing all of those things, I decided to commit all of my energies full time, if I could, to serving San Franciscans as a judge. And I applied to become a judge. After 4 rounds of vetting, I was appointed by Governor Newsom in March 2022. And since then, I've been working in the Superior Court as a judge, first in the traffic department, and then in 2023 in preliminary hearings, where I've tried to run my courtroom by the book. By that, I mean, I respect the law, respect the legal process, and respect everyone who comes before me. And it's very much my view that the way that we address San Francisco's issues from the perspective of being a judge is to ensure that we apply the law. And doing so, I really, truly believe, is the best way that we can solve any of the problems that we have, including the central concerns about public safety that are so resonant in our city today. And so
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Apologies. You are beginning to get into a topic that we will get to in a moment, but thank you very, very much for your background.
Sure.
Jean Roland, thank you very much for coming. Please give us a background on yourself.
Thank you. So my name is Jean Myungjin Roland, and I'm running for Superior Court Judge. I am a veteran prosecutor. I have been in the District Attorney's Office for 23 years. I started in the misdemeanor unit in 2001, and I have been through almost every unit in that office, including preliminary hearings, domestic violence, elder abuse, stalking, juvenile, child abuse, sexual assault. I'm currently the head of the General Felony Trial Unit, where I see the majority of the felony crimes that are hitting San Francisco. I grew up in San Francisco, and I went to Westport Lutheran. I went to Lowell High School. I went to UC Berkeley, and I have two children who are in schools in San Francisco now. Throughout my career, I have sought to balance public safety and accountability within the justice system. As a prosecutor, I reviewed thousands of cases where I've had to weigh the evidence, and I've spoken to people involved in those cases, and I have had to make tough, thoughtful decisions on those cases every single day. As a judge, I will balance public safety, accountability, and compassion in the courtroom.
Thank you very much. Excellent. Okay, so thank you for the background. Apologies for cutting you off as I did Judge Thompson, but the reason is my next question is going to very much get to what each of you was beginning to speak about. And Judge Thompson, since I asked you to go first, Jean, this time I will ask you to respond first. We'll alternate back and forth with each of these. I'd like you to imagine you are speaking to a first-time voter who wants to understand how to make an intelligent, informed choice in this election for a Superior Court judge. And it's a funny election, right? It's not like other elections. It's a little challenging for people to really understand how to think about this. How would you explain to this person the way they should evaluate judicial candidates? And I want to ask you, please focus on the framework, the information they should use in general terms without any specific discussion about yourself or your opponent. I promise we'll get there. But right now, talk about the framework and the information, the way people should think about making that decision. Jean, please go.
Okay. So I think that the way the voters can look at which candidate is the better candidate is to look at our experience and to look at what we have done, not just professionally, but also in the community. Looking to see how connected the candidates are to the community. Also looking at the type of cases or the type of legal issues that we have looked at, dealt with. I think it's important to look at how we are not only connected to the community, but also how many cases we have dealt with that include members in the community.
Let me push you a little bit on this notion of connected to the community. What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, actually seeing what is happening in the community itself. You know, can I talk about my own experiences or should I just keep it
general? We're going to get to the next question, but for now, I want you to talk in general terms.
Okay, so it's different. Okay, so I'm going to try to talk in general terms. It's about knowing the people who we are a public servant to, right? So being a judge is being a public servant, and to be able to make the decisions that impact people's lives, it's important to know the people that we are actually making these decisions on the community's behalf, as well as the people who are involved in the system itself. So those are the connections that I'm talking about.
Okay, so I've heard about, so thank you very much. It's excellent clarification. So about the connections with the community, really understanding what's going on. And you also talked about experience, legal experience, right? Sort of the quality and quantity of the legal experience.
Yes.
Which is probably a little difficult for lay people to understand, but we will get there in the next question when we talk more specifically. Judge Thompson, how would you answer exactly the same question?
So I answer the question the way that I was asked the question when I served on the Magistrate Judge Merit Selection Panel for the Northern District of California, where we vetted judges to be evaluated for federal judicial appointments, as well as the Judiciary Committee of the Bar Association of San Francisco. What one looks to is what is the range and depth of someone's work experience, because when someone becomes a judge in San Francisco, you're not assigned to one department forever. You are assigned to address, it could be any number of the disciplines that touch the community, ranging from criminal law to civil law to family law to juvenile to traffic. And so there's a look at the range of experience and exposure one has, as well as the depth of the experience one has. Looking at how many cases have they had? Have they tried cases? Have they done work in different types of formats? Because we have alternative ways of resolving disputes. And so we look at, have they been involved with mediations, arbitrations, as well as trial work? That's the first structure one looks at. The second category one might look at is leadership. Have they been within organizations where people with whom they worked looked to them for guidance and demonstrated leadership in organizations in which they were engaged? If someone's just a member, the view is that they may not be able to guide the room and guide the conversation in a way that a judge may have to do to be in a position to weigh the competing sides and make decisions. The third thing one looks at is community engagement and involvement. And looking at that, you can look at the kinds of organizations they're involved with, how they're involved in community, to demonstrate the ties one has to the community in which they're serving in here, San Francisco. The other area is professional organization involvement. Are they really involved in the legal profession and deeply integrated and understand what the law is about? Because the central role of a judge, unlike other politicians, is to apply the law. And if someone has demonstrated, because they do speaking engagements and do a lot of writing and things like that, those are all things voters can evaluate in assessing how much do they really dig into the law and try to understand and respect the law. And another area that one can look at is how are they really regarded by the people who have worked with them, interacted with them, and seen them, and looking at and speaking to people who have been on the other side of them. And the final thing is looking for independent assessments of who they are, whether it's a question of whether they've won awards, whether they've gotten commendations, whether they've gotten strong ratings from organizations that are nonpartisan, like the Bar Association of San Francisco, or other kind of nonpartisan entities that are really designed to ensure that the protection of the legal profession, as well as an independent judiciary, as opposed to a political agenda.
Great. Okay, thank you. So I'm going to summarize your answer, maybe a little simplistically, but I'm going to summarize it as experience, legal experience, professional experience, engagement in the community, and also leadership, both of which I think are very similar to the answer that Jean gave. And I think you added another component, which is very interesting, which is reputation. Reputation sort of within the community, reputation professionally. Great. Okay, so I think each of you have done a great job of laying out the general framework. Now I want to ask you to apply it specifically to yourself and or your, well, not or, definitely to yourself and to whatever extent you think is relevant to your opponent as well, but definitely, of course, to yourself. Use the same framework, and we're going to go in reverse order. So Judge Thompson, we're going to start with you. Why should voters pick you, given your framework?
I will. So in terms of my legal experience, I worked in civil law on a broad range of cases, starting with the specialization of antitrust and then branching out to a lot of different types of litigation where I represented companies, individuals, either as plaintiffs or as defendants, ranging from false advertising, business torts, housing, real estate developers, people in the banking industry, people in technology, also doing work on immigration, asylum cases, landlord-tenant cases, things like that. Really broad range of experience in civil courts, both at the federal level and around the state of California. And I also can describe in terms of my experience doing that in the San Francisco courts, in San Francisco, in the Superior Courts, but also I have administrative experience having handled cases before the California Public Utilities Commission, and in terms of that broad range of experience doing private arbitrations and mediations. So I have a very broad range of experience, including, unlike a lot of people who are just civil litigators, trying actual cases in federal and state courts and getting results and being an active advocate. In terms of my experience in leadership, I outlined in describing my background some of the roles that I played in the Bar Association of San Francisco. I was one of the officers of the Bar Association's foundation. At the local level, I was on the Judiciary Committee, and I was on a selection committee, which was an ad hoc committee. At the state level, I was on the executive committee of the State Bar of California, its unfair competition section. And nationally, I was in the leadership and on the council of the American Bar Association's antitrust section, as well as a presidential appointee to the Standing Committee on Publishing Oversight. And so in terms of professional experience, those are things I did, as well as in the community. I've been involved with everything from being on the board of a low-income housing project in the Mission, to being at the top of the hill, chair of the board of Grace Cathedral, on the board of California Pacific Medical Center, and chairing that board when we decided to bet on what is now the Van Ness campus, and on the board and in a leadership position of the American Conservatory Theater, when we bet on the promise of what might happen in mid-market, an area I'm very familiar with because we chose to buy the Strand Theater in that part of the city. In terms of reputation, I also—
And just, sorry, asking you quickly to wrap it up with this.
I received lots of awards and commendations, and that was part of the vetting. The evaluations I received from hundreds of evaluators about my work, and I will posit that my opponent does not have that kind of range of experience, that kind of versatility, and hasn't, at least in any form in which I've participated, demonstrated that depth of commitment to San Francisco since she left to go to college.
Great segue. Okay, thank you very much. Jean, same question to you. Take specifically within the framework that's been described, why should voters pick you?
Sure. So I've been in the district attorney's office for 23 years. I started in the district attorney's office when I came out of law school. And here is my experience. I have been through different units in the district attorney's office, from being a trial lawyer for about 7 to 8 years, where I've prosecuted crimes in domestic violence. I've done criminal threats, robberies, we've done burglaries. So we've done a multitude of different crimes. From there, I was managing attorney. I've managed the misdemeanor unit, excuse me, and the domestic violence unit, and the stalking, the elder abuse. I went through that already. And the connection that I've made in the community is mainly through my work. But here is what I do have, is the connection to the people. I have spoken to thousands of victims of crime. I've spoken to offenders of crime with their attorneys. I am out in the community. My volunteer work is in the community. So I've spoken to people who live in this community. I have spoken to people in the farmers market because I take my kids to the farmers market throughout different places in San Francisco. I'm deeply embedded in the school communities where my children go, where we are always in the community doing volunteer service, and I'm speaking to the people. So I hear and I'm connected to the community as I hear their concerns about everything that is happening in San Francisco. That is what moves me and drives me to do this right now. I also have been able to work collaboratively with all agencies that are in the judicial system. That includes the defense bar. That does include the courts, the judges, the community-based organizations. I have partnered with community-based organizations to develop programs for juveniles. We have partnered with many different organizations to create all these opportunities. We have internship programs, which I actually run in the district attorney's office, where I am connected to the young interns who are also growing up in this community as well. As far as awards, you are correct, Judge Thompson. I do not have awards. I do not seek recognition for awards because I am a public servant. I've been a public servant for 23 years to San Francisco, and I have never asked to be recognized for any of the work that I have done, because I do it because I am proud to be a public servant in San Francisco, and that is something that I have chosen to do for my entire lifetime. So I have the experience and I have the qualifications, I have the connections to the community, and I have worked collaboratively with many different agencies in San Francisco. So that is what I'm putting forward to the voters.
Terrific. Thank you very much. I'm going to ask, so far we've been asking kind of general questions and really asking each of you to kind of fill it in yourself. I'd like to turn to a specific issue, and I want to set this issue up by noting that we do not want to ask either one of you how you would rule in any specific cases, right? We understand that that is not something that you should talk about, and it's not our intention to try to ask you to talk about that. But I think it is just true, I think we can all agree, voters care a lot about some very specific issues. They want to understand each of you and your qualifications and your temperament and sort of the way you think about the role. But people also care a lot about specific issues. They care about the fentanyl crisis. They care about the rise in rates of certain property crimes and the perception of feeling less safe in the city. And they want to take those factors into account when they cast their vote for judge. But at the same time, voters understand, or hopefully they should understand, that a judge is supposed to be impartial, focus on applying the law, the facts of any given case, right? The judge is not the district attorney, the judge is not the police, the judge is not the legislature, right? The judge has a very specific role. But people want to take into account their views about, their concerns about these issues around fentanyl, around certain kinds of crime. And so my question for you is, how should voters think about these factors as they look at each of you and decide how to cast their votes? And Jean, we'll start with you since you were the last one to answer the previous question.
So if I understand you correctly, the question is, how should voters think about the factors for the fentanyl crisis, the rise, the perception, I guess, of
what's the right way for voters to look at each of you and assess you and think about what their concerns may be around some of these issues, right, which are clearly very front and center for people. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, understand this is the judge has a very specific role, and they need to evaluate you as a judge and not as sort of the vessel for other types of concerns.
Okay. So I do think that judges have to look at public safety. And I think if you look at what I have done my whole lifelong, my lifelong public service as a DA has been about public safety. That is what we have been doing. That's what I have been doing. And a part of that, I am speaking to the victims. I actually think it's very important to be able to bring voices in. And I think being a judge, you also listen to the voices that are in the courtroom. And from that, judges also have discretion. Judges need to be impartial, and I 100% agree with that. And judges need to follow the law, apply the law. I agree with that. But judges also have discretion. There are different points in a case when there is discretion that needs to be used. For example, at an arraignment, whether or not a person is detained or released. The judges need to hear the arguments that are made by the attorneys. They need to look and weigh the evidence that is in front of them, and they make those determinations. There are different other areas of stage of points when discretion is used, like at a preliminary hearing, right? The judge is going to make a determination based upon the law whether or not evidence is excluded or admitted. And judges also at that point can make determinations as to whether or not a person should remain detained, whether or not they should be remanded back into custody, or whether or not they should be released. There are discretion points at a sentencing phase, right? Giving the appropriate sentencing after hearing the argument, looking and hearing the evidence, and making the decision as to what an appropriate sentence should be. These are discretion points that judges have, among others. So when we look at what the discretion or the criteria for discretion is being used, it should be with an eye for public safety, balancing that with compassion, balancing that with the rights of the defendant, the rights of the victim, and then coming to those conclusions. So as I've said, I've reviewed thousands of cases, and that is exactly what I have been doing, weighing the evidence, speaking and hearing to the people involved in these cases, and then making these thoughtful, tough, hard decisions, balancing public safety, compassion, and looking at the rights of everyone involved.
Thank you very much. Judge Thompson, same question to you.
So I'm going to start with points of agreement. I agree that judges will and should apply the law and balance public safety, consider the arguments of both sides, and use their discretion to be compassionate where that's appropriate. As someone who lives and works in San Francisco and has for many years, I am sensitive to the concerns that people have and the frustrations that they have. There are enormous challenges that the city faces in terms of public safety. And I appreciate the concerns that people have, having experienced crime myself and walking around the city in the neighborhoods in which I live and where I like to move around, and no one wants to leave dinner and see broken glass outside their car because they've returned from a great dinner and they are experiencing that kind of event. That's part of the reality that has become San Francisco. But I recognize that I'm also a judge. And my role as a judge is different from the role that I had when I was an advocate. When I was an advocate, I could collect information, I could talk to people, I could push information, I could gather information in a certain kind of way that I cannot anymore, because if I do that, I cannot be viewed as fair and impartial and independent. And so what I encourage voters to do is think about the records of the people who are before them and the experiences that they have and the experiences they're describing, where they've placed themselves in environments where they're considering different points of view, weighing those points of view, dealing with difficult decisions, and coming up with a result. My view, very strongly held, is that well-run courts are the way that we can address issues of public safety. And the reason I think that well-run courts are the way that courts can address public safety is because judges don't decide who gets arrested. That's the role of law enforcement. Judges don't get to decide who gets charged. Judges decide, in the most important way where we exercise our discretion is ensuring that cases are running smoothly and that we're applying our judgment in a way where we don't get reversed or appealed, which is a check on the exercise of discretion that's abusive, but where we are placing ourselves in a position where I can reflect on my own experience sitting on the bench. And in the last year, sitting in a preliminary hearings department, I have literally had over 8,000 matters on my calendar. In the last year alone, I have handled over 400 preliminary hearings. And the average preliminary hearing is about 90 minutes long. That was a deep dive into the criminal law, where on a daily basis, I'm balancing the types of issues that my opponent has described in real time, where I am ensuring that the prosecutors have done their job if I'm entertaining a plea to contact the victim so that victim can come forward. But I also think that one of the ways that we can exercise our discretion without controversy is ensuring that when someone comes to court, whether they're a victim, whether they're in the public, or whether they're a criminal defendant, is so that we're not re-traumatizing people, and such that we're encouraging people to recognize that there's accountability at certain stages in our process, but also that the courts need not be a hostile, intimidating environment, particularly for people coming forward who are members of the public who have already been scarred by an event that's occurred to them, regardless of what the outcome might be.
Great. So now I'm going to ask each of you to comment briefly. I'm going to take the same topic, but sort of like turn it up just a little bit, right? Let's focus on fentanyl. There's clearly a fentanyl crisis going on. And people can observe something seems not to be working. Is there any way in which you think that you should take that into account in how you judge the cases or what kinds of judgments you make? I just want to ask each of you to take a minute or so. Judge Thompson, you're just very specifically around sort of what's happening in fentanyl with the fentanyl crisis in San Francisco, and to what extent at all that what's happening changes and affects the way you think about the way you render judgments.
Well, I think there are two different things, a couple different things. One, in terms of rendering judgments, I acknowledge that fentanyl, the potency of fentanyl, puts it on a magnitude that is so much more lethal than what we've seen before. One could argue, and others have, that it's a public safety concern. Under California law, however, the legislature hasn't classified this as a category of serious and violent offenses. And so in making things like detention decisions, for example, courts are bound by a legal standard where they can't differentiate fentanyl from other Schedule II drugs, because under the law, they're in the same statute and they're supposed to be evaluated based on the same standard. But I think judges can exercise discretion when they're looking at those kinds of issues. When we look at the prospects, if you're in a collaborative court, for example, and you're looking at treatment and treatment plans, I'm not in that kind of department right now, but if you're looking at the viability of those treatment plans, or you're looking at what the prospects are for this person, or when you're evaluating issues of what are some of the secondary issues that we might be dealing with, if there is room for discretion when we're looking at less restrictive alternatives and conditions that we might impose on people, all of those can kind of play in. But the guiding principle is that I think that a lot of people are really concerned that fentanyl is such a public safety issue. It should be treated categorically differently. And the challenge I have is that's not the state of the law. And if I were to apply a categorically different standard, I don't think we can comply with the law.
Sure. Okay, thank you very much. Jean, same question to you.
Well, I don't think that anybody is saying that fentanyl is categorically should be categorically different in a legal setting. But when we look at fentanyl, it is killing numerous people in the city, and it is rampant. I mean, it's so rampant that we have other agencies of law enforcement coming into San Francisco to deal with the fentanyl crisis itself. And when you look at that magnitude, I think you do have to look at public safety. And here are the points where judges can make a difference in the fentanyl crisis is when we look at the amounts. I mean, we're not looking at 1 or 2 grams. When somebody has 2, 3, 25 pounds of fentanyl, and we're saying, well, it's a first time offense, so 25 pounds of fentanyl, which can devastate this city, is a big deal. And we have to look at that. Then we also have to look at repeat offenders. The first time, and then the second time, the third time, the fourth time. Having multiple open cases or having prior convictions for dealing fentanyl should make a difference when a judge is looking at what should my ruling and decision be when I am looking at someone who is repeatedly out there on our San Francisco streets dealing fentanyl. So these are discretion points that judges can look at.
Okay.
And I think that is just specifically for fentanyl, the fentanyl crisis.
Okay, terrific. Thank you very much. I have 2 more questions. I'm going to finish with a general question. My next to last question, the next question for you is going to be much more specific. And I'm going to violate my rules a little bit. I'm going to go back to you, Judge Thompson, and I'll explain why in the question. So I want to ask about a report by Stop Crime SF. I'm raising this report, and I want to be very clear. I'm not in any way endorsing it. I'm not in any way criticizing it. I'm raising it because it has had a very large political effect. It may very well be because of this report and because of the people behind this report that, in fact, we have 2 contested races in this cycle. And in that report, they issued what they call judge report cards based on their observation of judges and their rulings in court. And out of 14 judges, they issued what they called a failing grade to 2 judges. And those are the 2 judges who now each have a challenger. Obviously, Judge Thompson, you're one of them. So my question is, with that background, what comments do you have about this report? And I would like to start with you, Judge Thompson.
Well, thank you for that question. I appreciate it. And I want to start in echoing points of agreement that I have with my opponent about considering the amounts of fentanyl, whether someone's a repeat offender, where they were located when something happened. All of those are variables that are considered when making a detention decision, for example, where someone's being arraigned. The second thing is, in my role, I don't try cases. And so the only time I'm considering sentencing is when there's a plea deal that's presented to me. And I can pose the question, how is it that this is an appropriate way to resolve a case when the DA's office filed a motion to detain this person and is now saying this person should be released on probation? And so I do apply those criteria, and I think that's really important. I think the unfortunate thing about the Stop Crime report card, as it's described, is it is not an independent assessment of me or what I've done. Because when you look at the number of people they've evaluated, out of 14, they only evaluated 4 who were actively involved in actual criminal court matters, even though there were many more who had more experience than me and did more than me. And the assessments were based on people who either work with or work for my opponent, and they were evaluating criteria that were judged by and a report that was developed by a political action committee that has endorsed my opponent. And so I don't think it is a neutral, objective study. And in fact, I believe when I have gone through and addressed specific items that they have raised, I have demonstrated that either the claims are false, or I've demonstrated and explained why it is they have gotten it wrong. One key example was an individual where I denied a motion to detain doing a very rigid analysis of California Supreme Court law, which was a recent way that shaped how we're supposed to evaluate these kinds of issues. I was sitting in as the substitute teacher in another judge's department after I had been on the bench for a couple of months. I looked at the public safety assessment tool that's created for judges to look at from the Pre-Trial Services Division, and I evaluated the information presented by the DA and by the defense lawyer. And what I concluded was that I would impose stricter conditions than what was recommended in that report. And in applying those stricter conditions, I made the determination that that was consistent with my obligations under the law. But one of the things that isn't reported anywhere is that that person who had a right to be out on bail, that person has returned to court and has not reoffended. And so the narrative that I'm a contributor to the revolving door of people being picked up on fentanyl charges and then immediately back on the street is just not true. And so I can't go into the heads of the motivations for that, but I do agree that we see that in the challenges that are before the voters now.
Great, thank you very much. Jean, same question to you.
So let me start off by saying that I do not work for, nor do I work with Stop Crime SF. I work for the city and county of San Francisco, and I represent the people. So I want to make that very clear.
No, I'm sorry, I didn't intend to suggest
organization,
that.
which is, I'm sorry, Judge Thompson, I'm just commenting on what you had said, and I am making it very clear for everyone who is hearing and watching this. I represent the people. I've represented the people for 23 years. I do not work for, nor do I work with Stop Crime SF. The people who are endorsing me because they see that I value public safety. Nothing more, nothing less. So I want to make sure that's clear.
Noted.
Now, in terms of everything else, I am going to stick with the judicial canons because I cannot really say anything that would be about my opponent. And I do want to stick with that. But I will say this. When we are looking at large amounts of fentanyl, when we are looking at repeat offenders, and when we are looking at the fact that these cases, these fentanyl cases are coming through these preliminary hearing courts, there is impact that is made from these decisions. I know I didn't even know what the report card results were going to be until they came out, and I read through them. Okay. And I can say that in looking at what they have done, these are people, these are volunteers, these are members of San Francisco who went to the courthouse on their own time and spent hours sitting in these courtrooms, watching and just observing what is happening in our San Francisco courts. They took their time, their own time, to be there and pulling whatever they can. And I know that it was a painful, long, arduous task and job that they were doing because they are driven by wanting to have a better, safer San Francisco. They were pulling these complaints, the information from the courts painstakingly. And they went through all of the information to be fair, to look at everything. They looked at all the judges. So I don't know all the volunteers who went to the courtrooms. I don't know who they all are, but they were doing this because they wanted to bring some sort of transparency to the court. They wanted to bring transparency and information to the voters so that the voters can see what is happening. And perhaps now is a time for change. So that is what I would say in terms of this report card.
Terrific. Thank you very much. We are almost at time. I want to ask one last question. It's a little bit more of a sort of open-ended question, and I want to ask each of you to do your best to keep it to 1 minute. And what I want to ask you is, how is your understanding or your perspective of the position that you're running for, the Superior Court judge, evolved over the last few years? And Jean, you'll answer first, and Judge Thompson, you'll get to finish. Keep it to roughly a minute if you can.
Sorry, can you just repeat that question? Trailed off.
How's your understanding and perspective of the position of Superior Court judge evolved over the last couple of years?
Okay. I have the utmost respect for the judges. I have worked for judges. I've not worked for judges, but I have been in front of judges my entire career. And I know many of them. And I have had discussions and conversations with them. And I have the utmost respect. As a DA, I would not be challenging any judge. I have so much respect for them. But here's what I will say. I value public safety, and I think that the courts have evolved. Not to say that the courts don't look at public safety, but I think the courts have a role where they can do something different or maybe something more. They have definitely been hearing the voices of the victims more. At least I see that in many of the judges now. And I see how they're interacting, especially at the juvenile division. And it is admirable. I think it's admirable what the judges are doing in terms of looking at the individuals, because I can tell you now, there's no cookie cutter defendant that comes in front of a judge. There needs to be compassion. There needs to be a sense of looking at everything. But here's what I would like. I would like to have that same individuality, that same voice for victims of crime that come into the courtroom. I would like, there to
I'm
be
sorry, I'm going to ask you to wrap it up in the next 10 to 15.
transparency and equality in terms of everyone who is involved in the system. So I think that the judges have been going in a very different direction, and I want to be a part of that change. So I will end it there.
Terrific. Thank you very much. Judge Thompson, you get the final answer.
Thank you. And one of the things I like to acknowledge is I did not intend to suggest that Ms. Roland works for Stop Crime SF.
I understood.
Yeah.
In these panels, sometimes you don't exactly say what you mean to say. I think we all understand that was you didn't mean to say it that way.
No, I just meant some of the reviewers, a lot of them worked for her. That's all I meant in terms of DAs. And one of the things I've learned as a judge is acknowledging those points where there is a misunderstanding of something I may have said or done, to try to make sure that it's clear. Because in taking the opportunity to try to make sure it's clear and using plain language so that our system isn't confusing, isn't something that they should stand off from, is one of the things that I look at as my role. I've only been a judge since April 2022, and I have been overwhelmed by how enormously gratifying it is to be in a position where I'm working on issues that directly affect my neighbors every day. And I have enormous respect for my colleagues, their commitment to applying the law in a way to serve our community. The biggest concern I have is what's happening in terms of politicizing courts. And the reason I'm concerned about that is because I think there's a risk that we will have a decay of respect for the courts and the role that we play. That's one of the things that's evolved by seeing what's happened by some of the rhetoric nationally and locally, and that's a concern that I have.
So apologies for interjecting, but I want to ask you, you've been a judge for a little less than 2 years. How has your understanding and perspective of that position changed in that 22 months or 20 months or so you've been a judge?
The vast amount of issues that I get to deal with in rapid fire, where I'm responsive to people who come into my courtroom who may have experienced the worst event of their lives, seeing people who are criminal defendants and possibly sentencing them, and being in a position to hear feedback in real time from people and recognizing that I'm being counted on by people in my community to try to apply my skills to get it right. That's one of the things I think in the abstract you can think about when you submit the application. And it's one of the things I have lived. And I think that it's one of the things when I go into the community and people ask me, how do you like what you do? I say, I love my role. And I love my role not because it's easy, but because I feel it gives me the opportunity to apply my background and skills in a way to really help address problems that people are really concerned about. And that's not something I ever really anticipated in the abstract and thinking about what it meant to be in this role.
Terrific. Well, thank you very much, Judge Thompson, Jean Roland. You've been generous with your time. I think this has been a great conversation. I want to thank you both very much. And now I want to ask you to mute yourselves and turn off your cameras. You are welcome to stay. You are welcome to leave. So please turn off your camera. Please mute yourself. Judge Begert and Chip Zecher. Chip, are you with us? And
I
Ron,
am. Thank you.
hello. Okay.
Magic of television. Thank you.
All right, terrific. Thank you very much. So I'm going to ask you both to indulge me for about 45 seconds. I need to take a quick bio break.
Oh,
I'm going
perfect.
to be right back. I'm going to mute myself, but keep the camera on so you all know when I'm back momentarily. Thank you.
I'm going to do the same. Thank you. Yeah.
All right, thank you both very much. Apologies, I've been in front of my computer for the last hour and a half, and I don't think I quite adequately took into account that I might need a quick break. Judge Begert, thank you very much for joining us. Chip, there we are. Terrific. Thank you very much. Okay, so thank you for this. We're now about to begin the second round. The audience has been watching, and so I think the audience knows what the drill is going to be. I assume the two of you basically know the drill. Hopefully you were watching. Terrific. I'm going to start exactly the same way as I started the last panel. And Judge Begert, again, I will start with you. So please briefly introduce yourself and tell us about yourself.
Thank you very much. And thank you everyone for having an interest in the betterment of our community. I've had the honor of serving as a San Francisco Superior Court judge for 13 years. I was appointed by Governor Schwarzenegger in 2010 after a very extensive review process. I have presided over more than 10 civil trials as a judge. I have presided over more than 20 criminal trials as a judge. I have extensive experience in family law, in juvenile justice, which we used to call juvenile delinquency, in juvenile dependency, which is the process by which the state intervenes when children need to be protected. I have experience in traffic, in appeals, in the subject matters of addiction treatment, mental health, housing issues, and a huge variety of court functions. basically every function that the court has, from mental health courts to civil, criminal, and family law courts. I've served on the board of directors of several nonprofit agencies while I was a private attorney. I served as a private attorney for 21 years at the very well-known and long-standing law firm of McCutcheon, Doyle, Brown, and Anderson. I was on the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Board. I'm also Asian American. My mother is a Japanese immigrant, so I got involved with the Asian Law Caucus over 30 years ago. I served as the president or the chair of the board of that organization for a number of years. I was also the chair of the board of the Asian American Justice Center and the National Asian Pacific American Legal Consortium. I have served as counsel of record in many pro bono cases, cases specifically fighting anti-Black racism, asserting the rights of Asian Americans, assisting immigrants and tenants and minority-owned businesses and nonprofits. As a result of my longstanding history in the community, I have the endorsement of many people, including elected officials Scott Wiener, Matt Haney, Phil Ting, Sheriff Paul Miyamoto, former district attorney Susie Loftus, the people who should know the most about how judges are performing, my fellow judges. 48 judges on the San Francisco Superior Court have endorsed me, and lawyers. I have the endorsement of 6 different bar associations representing the entire spectrum of San Francisco lawyers. Every bar association that's issued an endorsement has endorsed me.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sorry. Okay, thank you very much, Judge Begert. Chip, please briefly introduce yourself and tell us about your background.
Sure. I'm Chip Zecher, and I'm running against Michael Begert for Superior Court Judge. I have resided in the Sunset District full-time since 1996, so I'm a neighbor to all of you on the west side. I live with my partner, Gary, who's a small business owner in Union Square. He's also Asian. I was a graduate of Santa Clara University and then USF School of Law. My first job out of law school was as a research attorney at the San Francisco Superior Court. From there, I was a trial attorney doing insurance defense work, trying cases around the 9 Bay Area counties for approximately 13 years. For the last 15 years, I've commuted down to Silicon Valley as a general counsel to 2 different high-tech manufacturers in Santa Clara. During the last several years, I've also worked full-time as an adjunct law professor at Lincoln Law School, having taught constitutional law, contracts, and community property. In 2019, Governor Newsom appointed me to the UC Law Board of Directors, formerly UC Hastings. And I've also served as a chairman of the board and member of the board of directors of a K-12 school in Silicon Valley. Finally, I'm a board member on Rescue SF, and we look at ways to try and get the unhoused off the streets and into permanent housing. I'm not going to bore you with all of my endorsements. You can go to my website for that. And so I'll turn it back over to you. Thank you.
Okay, terrific. Thank you very much. I'm going to ask the same question that I started off the last panel. So, Chip, we'll start with you. Imagine you're speaking to a first-time voter, seeking guidance on how to make an intelligent, informed choice in an election that is a little different from most other elections and can be hard really to know, like, how should we think about who the, how to make our choice? So how would you explain to this person how they should evaluate judicial candidates? And I really want to ask you to focus on the framework and the information they should use in general terms. We'll have an opportunity to get more specific about each of you, but really the goal of this question is to have you articulate in general terms, how should voters be thinking about the way they make this decision?
You know, that's a great question and one that I hear a lot on the campaign trail. And basically, I think probably just a quick step back to understand what voters are looking at. The California Constitution provides that a judge, whether they're appointed or elected, serves a 6-year term. And at the expiration of that 6-year term, that judge must run again for re-election. So we are at that point with Judge Begert. He's running again for re-election. Under the California Constitution, Article 6, Section 16, a sitting judge who has 10 years of legal experience, I have 33, am entitled to run against the judge and give the public, voters, an opportunity to assess the Judge Begert's record and assess my experience and make a determination. Now, what should the public look at? Well, I think one of the basic questions that I want the public to look at and voters to look at and ask this simple question: does the judge's record help or hinder public safety on our streets? And to get to that point, you need to look at the judge's record. So you'll need to get out there on the internet, Google, and find out sources that are out there that discuss Judge Begert's record, discuss his body of decisions, and be able to make a determination on that basis. Really, we're asking the voters to do this job and really check and make sure that they determine that our elected judges be guardians of public safety and help public safety on our streets.
And before I go over to Judge Begert, you've articulated a framework and you focused on how they should evaluate the incumbent judge. How should they evaluate a challenger?
You know, so absolutely, you should look at people's employment records. Absolutely, you should look at what types of civil litigation or trial experience they have. You should absolutely look at what civic activities are undertaken by a candidate. I will point out, and we need to be clear, the law provides only one thing. The only thing that a candidate needs to qualify for is being a lawyer for 10 years and in good standing with the bar. Judge Begert, when he was appointed, did not have any criminal law experience. He had the same amount of civil trial experience as I did. So, you know, there's no great mystery to being a judge. In fact, we need the process to be more transparent and the judges more accountable. So that's why I'm running for re-election against.
Okay, terrific. Judge Begert, again, we'll get to specifics soon. If you saw the last panel, you'll know that. But talk about the framework and the information that people should use in evaluating this race.
Well, first of all, let me respond that I'm the only one who has a record. It's a little bit like saying I've never missed a shot by a guy who's never been in the game. I've been in the game for 13 years. So yes, I have a record, and I would invite you to look at it. Just make sure you're looking at my actual record and not what some hit piece says my record is. There's a lot of misinformation out there. And if there are specific matters that you want me to address, I'd be happy to do that. Secondly, if we are talking about hiring somebody to do a job, we would look at their qualifications. We would look at their experience, the breadth and depth of their experience, and we would look at their reputation in the community where they have been working. I have been working in San Francisco for 34 years. I have gone through a process where hundreds of people were interviewed or submitted questionnaires relating to my experience as an attorney. And I have also had the opportunity to work with people as a judge. And I can tell you, I have a lot of support from lawyers from every step of my career, from family law, from juvenile dependency, from juvenile delinquency.
I apologize for interjecting.
Okay.
You're getting specific about yourself.
Thank you.
We're going to get there momentarily.
I hear you. I hear you. The other thing is you should be evaluating what a person's demeanor is. Okay, the judge elections have been kind of conflated with political elections. They're different because we are not policymakers. If you're electing somebody who's going to be enacting legislation or implementing legislation, those are policy questions. And you can ask, how are you actually going to pass legislation? What legislation do you want to pass? What kind of enforcement are you going to undertake, or what kind of agencies are you going to set up to implement the law? Those are for the other two branches of government. The question for judges are you going to follow the law? Are you going to do that with respect for everyone? Are you going to recognize that everyone in your court has humanity? And are you going to have the experience and the intellect to actually do that job effectively and fairly and impartially? Now,
Perfect. Okay, so may I cut you off? Is there anything else you feel you need to say? I'm sorry, I don't mean to. I want to make sure
we can proceed.
Okay, terrific. Thank you. Great. Now that you've each articulated the general framework, I want you each to talk specifically using that framework why you are the person the voters should choose. Judge Begert, we'll begin with you.
Because I have the experience that we have been talking about. Mr. Zecher says, oh, when I was appointed, we had the same level of experience. That's like saying when we finished grade school, we both had the same level of experience. My experience is vastly different from Mr. Zecher's at this point. I have been a judge for 13 years. I have been in all of the different functions of the court. I have experience in doing that. I have also had a great deal of experience in actually convening the experts in these areas. I have worked with the mayor's office. I have worked with the board of supervisors. I have worked with the head of the Department of Public Health, Dr. Grant Colfax. I've worked with the director of behavioral health, Dr. Hillary Kunins. I have worked with law enforcement. I have met with the precinct captains, two of the precinct captains in the Tenderloin. I've worked extensively with the chief of the BART police. So I have familiarity both with the people who are responsible for the programs in the city and also with the nonprofit entities who are providing services to people in need in the city. I have this background because for the past 5 years, I have been working in 3 different treatment courts: the drug treatment court, the community justice court, and the veterans justice court, which is particularly important to me because my father was a 20-year Air Force veteran. So I have the experience and I have the reputation in the community, which, as I mentioned previously, has resulted in widespread endorsement of my reelection.
Terrific, thank you. Now, Chip, before I turn to you, I'd like to ask you, Judge Begert, just to elaborate a little bit on your answer. So I would boil down your answer to the last question to experience and reputation. And one might interpret your response in the following sense: anybody who has had the depth, the length of experience that you have had, facing a challenger with a similar experience profile as Chip has, right, as Mr. Zecher has, which is to say legal experience but no experience in the same role, that anybody sort of like with that differential experience profile, that is in and of itself a very powerful argument to stay with the person with more experience. Is that the right way to understand your answer, or is there something more specific about the nature of your experience and the nature of your opponent's experience?
There is something more important about it. I'm not just saying I've been a judge for 13 years. I've been a judge in all of the different aspects of being a judge. Mr. Zecher has experience in one very specific area. For the past 15 years, he's been an in-house lawyer at in Santa Clara organizations. That's a very specific type of expertise. It doesn't include, I don't think Mr. Zecher has actually been an attorney in a courtroom for the past 15 years. My understanding is Mr. Zecher has been self-employed since April of 2020. All right. That is not just a different experience from mine. That is a very limited experience.
Perfect. Okay, thank you very much. That's a terrific clarification. Mr. Zecher, same question to you. Go ahead.
Well, I'm actually shocked that a judge of the Superior Court would get up there and lie. I have been I'm currently employed by Inovac. I am not self-employed. Don't know what else to say on that topic.
I can tell you where I got that information.
Sir, it's my time to speak. Thank you very much. This is not your courtroom.
That's okay. That's okay. Hang on. You did say that he was lying. So why don't you finish your answer, and then Judge Begert, you can quickly respond to that. So, but Mr. Zecher, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. All right, so let's start off. Judge Begert and I do have the same amount of experience before he joined the bench. I have been a civil trial lawyer. I have been a corporate attorney for the last 15 years. I would like to say I'm not running against Judge Begert because of his experience. I'm running against Judge Begert because of our experience of him, our experience of his body of decisions, our experience of the body of his decisions that are affecting public safety on our streets. That's why I'm running against him. You know, I understand that running against an incumbent judge allows them to wrap themselves in their robe. It allows them to get all the endorsements that they want from their fellow judges, because quite frankly, no judge wants to lose their job. And so they all band together, and that's what's happening here. And I tell you, the voters are frustrated because we're all paying for this incompetence on our streets. We have several instances which other groups have to speak about on Judge Begert's record, because the judicial canons do not let me speak about his record. But I will tell you that I have experience that Judge Begert doesn't have. I've been on the board of a foundation here in the city that looks at ways of getting the unhoused off the streets and up the housing ladder. And let me say, you cannot get up the housing ladder if you're addicted. Addiction prevents you from getting off the streets. How do we get people up the housing ladder? We terminate and get rid of fentanyl on our streets. So I say to the voters, look at this judge's record and understand if he helps or hinders public safety on our streets. I've also had extensive experience on 2 different school boards, including UC Law here in San Francisco. I understand the problems that result from public safety issues on our streets. It's a challenge to business revenue. It's a challenge to personal safety. It's a challenge to people walking on the streets themselves. I do think that if you've been in an ivory tower like Judge Begert has been for the last 12, 13 years, he lives in Piedmont. He doesn't even live in San Francisco. He doesn't understand the problems that we San Franciscans are experiencing from decisions that he's making. So I would go back to say that I have been a lawyer for 33 years. This is just nonsense that's going around, and I really want the voters to understand and look at the record of Judge Begert and answer the simple question: does he help or hurt public safety on our streets? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. So my next question is going to get very.
Are you going to let me say where I got that?
Yes, I promise. I know you're not, I'm almost kind of sort of a judge right now, and I know that you're probably not used to that. Yes. So my next question is going to get to sort of this topic. Before I get to that, Judge Begert, briefly, Mr. Zecher said that you mischaracterized his experience and he ascribed some intentionality to that, saying that you were lying. and you were going to say your basis for that. Can you just briefly explain what your basis was for the claim that you made?
Sure. There right now is up on the UC Law School San Francisco website a biography, and it says Mr. Zecher's period of employment at Intevac was up to 2020. When Mr. Zecher, we call it pulling papers, when he asked to get signature pages to run, that's when I learned of his name. So I looked him up on LinkedIn. He had a LinkedIn account. And his LinkedIn account stated at that time, corporate attorney, self-employed since April 2020 to the present. That LinkedIn account has now been deleted, so you can't see it, but I printed it out.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I think that adequately explains the basis. I don't want to go down this. We've got other things
but
to talk about.
you know what, I'm not sure.
Correct the
I'm
record?
employed by Intevac. I don't understand what all of this is about. I
Okay,
have zero idea. I'm currently employed by Intevac Inc. in Santa Clara. Frankly, I don't understand it.
Terrific. Okay, I think that's good enough. People can look this up for themselves if they would like.
Well, they can't anymore.
So people, well, there's all sorts of resources available on the internet. There's the Wayback Machine and so on and so forth. At any rate, we're going to move on. So I am going to now ask the same question that I asked next in the last panel. I want to raise, and Mr. Zecher, you did raise this specifically. I think that public safety, and really I think very specifically the fentanyl crisis, is something that voters clearly care about in the city, and I think is very much in people's minds as they think about these judges' races. And I think people want to take that into account when they make their decision. But at the same time, voters understand, or they should understand, that judge is supposed to be impartial, focus on applying the law, facts of any given case, right? There are many different government entities involved in addressing the situation on the streets. So starting first with Mr. Zecher, how should voters think about the fentanyl crisis, public safety generally? How should they take those concerns into account as they look at you and as they look at Judge Begert and decide how to vote?
Thank you. Yes. Well, I think that one of the things that we need to look at is the fentanyl crisis and how it affects all San Franciscans. What's going on right now, and what motivated me to run actually, is my experience through UC Law, San Francisco, located on the edge of the Tenderloin. We're having a terrific hard time with the open air drug markets there selling fentanyl, and with the gun violence on the streets. In fact, there was just a shooting on Hyde and Turk yesterday. One person killed, 4 injured. And that's been a big body count with the shootings around the law school, and all related to fentanyl drug sales. And when we look at our retail theft, you see people in Walgreens walking out of Walgreens with a bunch of product. They go turn around, sell that in secondhand markets in the Mission and in the Tenderloin, take that money and buy 2 or 3 days.
So I apologize for interjecting, but you're sort of listing a lot of things that are happening. How should people take that into account as they make this
Heading
decision?
there, but thank you. Yes. Okay. And so what we're looking for is, once this is happening, is we need to break the problem here. And the problem is the sale of fentanyl on our streets is contributing to a lot of the crime on our streets. And in order to do that, we need to ask our judges to use proper discretion. And we then need to look at existing judges and how they are using their discretion, and whether they are letting fentanyl dealers back out onto the street without any guardrails or assurances that they are going to show up for trial. Do you know we have 545 outstanding warrants currently for fentanyl drug users who are sellers who have not been able to be picked up and have not gone back to the courtroom to trial because judges have released them without proper guardrails? The discretion that the judge should use is look at, number one, the safety of the victim, and number two, the safety of the public and balance that with how likely will this defendant appear at trial or not. That's the sole discretion that should be exercised. And quite frankly, it's not being exercised correctly. And that's why I'm running against this candidate.
Judge Begert?
So this issue is very real to me. I am working out of a courthouse on Polk Street between Turk and Golden Gate. I walk through the Tenderloin every day of the working week, 5 days a week. I see the desperation in the Tenderloin. I see the hope in the Tenderloin. I work with people who are severely addicted to these highly dangerous drugs. I talk to people in my courtroom who have been Narcaned 3, 6, 10 times. Okay. I know people who have died, who have been through these programs, and they've died alone in their single occupancy hotel rooms of drug overdoses. So this is not some abstraction to me. I care about these issues. I am considering the poisonousness, the deadliness of fentanyl every day. I am not in a court where I decide whether people are released pre-trial. I am in 3 different treatment courts and now the care court, which is a mental health court. I am trying to help people overcome their addictions, their mental health challenges, their lack of adequate housing, their lack of dignity. And what I am doing is every day working towards a safer community, because if we can help people restore their self-respect, they are going to comply with the rules that we all comply with. That's my objective. And I get results. I have people tell me, Judge, you changed my life. And they have moved on and they're now contributing to the community in positive ways. So I am taking into account the importance of this. I have to take it into account because I am face to face with it every day.
Thank you. I'm going to ask a slightly different question this time now than I did in the previous panel. And I'd like to sort of frame it up in the following way. The previous Judge Thompson, he sort of liked to talk about, he has this phrase he likes to use, by the book, right? And so that's sort of like the way he likes to describe the way he thinks about his role. And when I listened to you, Judge Begert, I heard you emphasize the attempt to help the people who are appearing before you. It's a slightly different a slightly different sort of color to, or sort of framing of the way you think about carrying out your role. And so it leads me to ask, you know, the role of a judge necessarily entails making choices, applying interpretations, using discretion. So to what extent do you think your personal or your professional or your political perspectives or any other perspectives you bring that are not strictly legal should reasonably enter into your judgments? And, you know, to what extent they should be excluded from your judgments? I'll ask the same question, Mr. Zecher, but I'll start with you, Judge Begert.
Yeah, I think more what it has to do with is your aptitude for certain things and your inclination towards certain things. I've always sought out assignments where I can help people. I sought out an assignment in family law. I wanted to help people who were struggling with various problems and were at risk of losing their children. I wanted to help the children who were not being treated properly. I wanted to work with young people who were in trouble with the law. But in doing those jobs, you follow the law. So right now I'm running these 3 different criminal diversion treatment courts. I don't decide who gets into those courts. The DA decides. And they decide in conversation with the defense attorneys. But the person comes into my court because somebody else has already decided that the appropriate response would be to have them seek treatment. Now, I work with them. I do bring a certain perspective to that work, which I think is helpful because I'm telling people, hey, I see your humanity. I respect your dignity. I'm going to try to help you. I'm going to try to make you better because that's going to make all of us better off. That's going to make all of us safer. But if they fail, they go back to criminal court. Accountability is imposed. If they commit a new crime, the new crime is going to be evaluated. Hey, does this person belong in a treatment court at this point, having committed a new offense? And if the parties say, no, that doesn't meet our guidelines, or we don't agree to have that person here anymore, they go back to criminal court. I follow the law. I follow the agreement of the people who are the participants in the process. That's different from how I'm addressing somebody who comes in and says, I need help with something. So that's where your difference in perspective comes in. I think I'm good at that. And that's why I've sought out those types of assignments. That doesn't mean I don't follow the law when the law is the thing that dictates what happens next.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Zecher, I'm going to ask you the same question, just briefly to remind you, because I'm sure you're going to probably want to respond or weave in some of the things that Judge Begert just said. But as a reminder, the role of a judge entails making choices, applying interpretations. There's discretion involved. To what extent should personal, professional, political, or other perspectives reasonably enter into judges? To what extent should those perspectives be excluded, Mr. Zecher?
Well, it's super important, and the primary role of a judge is to make sure that every person who appears in front of him or her or them is treated with respect, dignity, and afforded the constitutional rights and protections. So that is the primary reason for being a judge. I would say the number one most important thing. Then you follow the law. I'm running because I believe that judges should not be deferring to social workers on matters concerning fentanyl drug sellers, and on repeat offenders should not be relying on social workers, but should be looking what the law says. Fentanyl drug sales should be treated under Health and Safety Code section violations with prison of 2 to 4 years or probation and or fine. They should not be treated as economic crimes. We have a serious crisis on our streets that needs to be dealt with. And I, further would like to point out that this judge was pulled off of criminal cases and stuck in drug courts and reassigned once he came up for re-election because he's not doing a great job there. So
that's not true.
That is true, and in fact, it's in the press as well. So you
But
really,
yeah, okay. This is the problem. People think that what's in the press is true. I still run drug court, community.
I understand you run drug court, but you are no longer doing felony arraignments, sir. You've been removed from that. You are not.
I never did felony arraignments. I've never had the assignment of felony arraignments. I've been in the drug treatment court, the veterans court, and the community justice court for 5 years. My assignment has not been changed as a result of this election at all.
It has been changed. Thank you.
Okay, so we have a bit of a disagreement in fact. We'll cover that momentarily. Is there anything else, Mr. Zecher, you wanted to say about the question that I had asked you about the role of applying discretion and judgment and so forth?
I think I've said all I need to say. Thank you.
Terrific. Okay.
I'm cognizant of the fact that people have lives outside of this.
Okay, terrific. So you made a claim, Judge Begert, you were disputing the claim. Can you just briefly explain what the claim is you're disputing?
It's not true.
Can you explain what it is? So he had said you were removed from.
Yeah,
felony
my assignment has not changed for 5 years, with one exception. There's a brand new care court, which I helped build and I'm now in charge of. And that assignment was added to the assignments that I previously had. I have never had a felony arraignment calendar. I have never had a preliminary hearing calendar. Those are the courts where the decisions about whether to detain somebody or not are made. I have always, for the past 5 years, including all the time during this election, had the same assignment. I am assigned to 3 different criminal diversion treatment courts, and starting in October of this year, I am assigned to the care court in addition to that. Now, I'll acknowledge, in fairness to Mr. Zecher, the press has gotten this, has kind of confused this because they say I'm no longer in a criminal assignment. Well, I'm in criminal diversion court. So it's sort of true that I'm not in a criminal assignment, but I wasn't in a criminal assignment before. So my assignment did not change.
Terrific. Thank you very much. Mr. Zecher, is there anything that Judge Begert said that you would dispute?
I think I've gone on record and I'd like to move on if possible.
Absolutely. Terrific. Okay, thank you very much. So now I'm going to bring up the same Stop Crime SF report that I brought up in the last panel. And once again, I think out of fairness, I'll start with Judge Begert, because even though that's not quite alternating in the same way, you know, the nature of the report, I think it's probably fair to bring it up, allow the incumbent to respond first. So the reason I bring this report up, not to endorse it, it's not to critique it. I bring up the Stop Crime SF report because it has played a very important political role, and it may very well be really a core reason that this is a contested race. And so what this report did is it issued what they call judge report cards based on their observation of judges and the rulings in court. And out of 14 judges, they issued what they called a quote unquote failing grade to 2 judges, Judge Thompson in the last panel and Judge Begert yourself. So starting with you, Judge Begert, are there any comments that you would like to make about this report?
Yeah, so Stop Crime SF has a political agenda. They were one of the groups that sponsored a Zoom fundraising call for Mr. Zecher early in the campaign. And during that call, they said their objective was to send a message to all the judges. Okay. They said that they had found Mr. Zecher to run against one of the judges, and they were looking for other people to run against other judges. Okay, this is before the report card came out. So after that, after the deadline for filing your notice of intention to run for a seat on the Superior Court had passed, so they knew they couldn't get anybody else to run, they issued the report card. I have spoken with several people who said that they were asked, they were approached and asked to run against judges, and they said they weren't interested. No, they didn't want to do it. Okay, so what happened was Stop Crime SF and other folks wanted to get people to run against judges. They found 2 people. So naturally, the 2 people the judges who were challenged by those 2 people got failing grades. Now, you wouldn't say, oh, we found 4 judges and we are giving them failing grades, because it wouldn't have the same political impact. The political impact is, oh, we chose these people because they had failing grades, when in fact, the opposite is true. They found people to run against me and Patrick Thompson, and then they said, well, the problems are these 2 judges. But it was explicitly for the purpose of sending a message to all of the judges. If they'd found 6 people to run against judges, 6 judges sitting on the court would have gotten failing grades.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Zecher?
Well, that's just, I'm not even quite sure how to address this. I heard about the Stop Crime report card this summer, and that was one of the reasons why I decided to run. Stop Crime had already gone down to the courthouse and done their assessment on Judge Begert. I think the voters need to ask a simple question: why would I take on Judge Begert if he didn't have a bad record? That's the simple answer there. So I, want the voters to look at the record and understand. Please feel free to go to Stop Crime's website, stopcrimesf.com. Look at it. Look at the way that they gathered all the data. Look at what they did to put together the report card. Stop Crime did not recruit me to run, sir. Not at all. What made me run was what's going on in the Tenderloin and how it's affecting organizations that I'm involved with, how it's affecting people's lives, how the decisions that you're making are affecting people's lives in the Tenderloin, and how we need to stop fentanyl drug sales on the streets and clean up the streets in that manner and make them safe for all residents. And I ask the voters to look at your record and understand whether or not you help or hinder public safety on our streets. This has nothing to do with Stop Crime.
Okay, thank you. So, it's very clear that the issue of public safety it looms very large in this race. How would you, Mr. Zecher, you have told people to research the record, Judge Begert's record, to take a look at the report, make their own decision, and so forth. Is there anything specifically that you believe you can comment on regarding that record, regarding your opponent's record, and regarding your own, how you believe you would act differently? And I do understand that we want to be careful not to run afoul of the judicial canon here. So I'm asking the question, since it's coming up. Do you think that there's a way that you can respond to that, and within the guidelines of the judicial canon? Of course, I'll ask Judge Begert the same thing.
Sure. Well, the problem here is part of your question is really asking me how I'd rule, and I can't answer that. That's simply not permitted, nor do I think that we should be politicizing the judiciary in that fashion. We should be preserving the independence of the judiciary. But what the California Constitution does provide is that voters have the right every 6 years to look at a judge's record and understand how that record affects their lives, public safety on the streets. And so to that end, I look at being a judge as a guardian of public safety. I grew up in a legal household. My mom was the first woman judge down in Santa Clara County for 28 years. She prized public safety. The judges that I knew growing up prized public safety. When our DA, Brooke Jenkins, came out last spring and said, I'm having trouble with some of the judges. Their decisions are impacting public safety on our streets and in a negative way. I need help. And I answered that call to service, and that's why I'm here. It's not because of any Stop Crime report card, sir. I can guarantee you that. It's the DA coming out and saying, hey, I'm having a problem with some of the judges. Okay? This is not gang up on Michael Begert. This is, I'm having a problem with some of the judges. Stop Crime has identified you as one of those judges and given you an F.
Okay, so thank you very much, Judge Begert, again, and I'm sure you'll probably want to respond, or you may not, so put entirely up to you, some of the things Mr. Zecher said. But I also do want to ask, like, as much as you can within the judicial canon, given how large the issue of public safety looms, can you speak to your record and how you believe it shows your qualities as a judge, and also addressing in an appropriate way the issue of public safety?
So I don't have anything specific to address. The canons do permit me as a candidate in an election to respond to a specific criticism. But unless I'm given a specific criticism, I'm not allowed to respond.
So I think a specific criticism would be that your record shows in general, and I'm not saying that I believe this, I'm saying a specific criticism would be that your record shows that you are too lenient on defendants who appear before you, specifically those involved in the sale or use of fentanyl, and that you prioritize the attempt to rehabilitate over and above the need for public safety.
Okay, so there was a specific instance. There were anonymous posters put up around town, which linked me to a specific defendant who had been arrested for having a large quantity of fentanyl. Those were false. I never released that person. I never released that person. So that person was in my court. She had been released by another judge previously. Actually, bail had been set by a different judge and she had posted bail. She was in my court. She was in one of the treatment programs. She was arrested for a new crime. I immediately sent the case that I had back to the criminal court to face prosecution with the other charge. So I followed the law. I never released her. Oh, and by the way, both of her cases were dismissed by the district attorney for, quote, lack of evidence. What does that mean? That means that the district attorney went into, or not the district attorney herself, but an assistant district attorney went into a courtroom, not my courtroom, a criminal courtroom, and said, Judge, please dismiss these cases. We do not have the evidence to proceed in the case. So that individual would have been released under any circumstances because there was no longer a case against her. But in any event, I did not release her. So this is the challenge that I have, is that there is misinformation out there and I can respond to that. And that leaves an impression that I do things in a certain way. And there's no way for me to respond to the implication because I'm not given a specific case to address. Okay. So if you have a specific case that you want me to explain that I've been criticized for, I am more than happy to stand by my record. And I would point out again, I'm the one who has a record.
Okay, terrific. Thank you very much. So we are coming to the end of our time, so I'm not going to, we could go one direction where we start bringing up different cases and go back and forth, but we're not going to do that. We're coming to the end. I would like to end with this one question, and it's a somewhat different question than I ended the last panel on. And because I want to highlight the fact that we have an interesting situation here where, Judge Begert, you have served as a judge for 13 years. Is that right? 13 years?
Yes.
So you have served for 13 years. And Mr. Zecher, you have not served as a judge.
That
But
is
as you rightly,
and as a lawyer for 33 years.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. But as you rightly point out, it is in the California Constitution. Judges come up for election every 6 years. They're allowed to be challenged and so forth. It's not common for a judge to be challenged. So I guess what I want to ask each of you, Judge Begert, I'll start with you. Talk about the fact that you are a sitting judge, you are being challenged. It's unusual for you to be challenged. How should we think about that? Is it a case of politics? Is it a case of the situation, the sort of frustrations that people are feeling? Do you think that there's elements of your record that are either misunderstood or perhaps people just have disagreements with? How do you think about that fact that you are a sitting judge, you are being challenged? And I'll ask you, Mr. Zecher, how do you think about the fact that there is naturally a high bar to clear to decide not to reelect an incumbent judge? Judge Begert.
I'm actually kind of enjoying the whole process. I think it's very healthy. I've gotten to meet a lot of very interesting people who are very devoted to this beautiful community. People like yourself who are not getting paid for what they're doing and who are really interested in making San Francisco a better place. We all want the same things. There's no question that any of the four people involved in this evening's debate want something bad for the city. There's no issue of anybody having a motive that is sinister. Everybody wants to make San Francisco safe, vibrant, beautiful, healthy. We might have different perspectives on how to accomplish that. And I think that the people that I meet out in the community have overall been very gracious, very generous, and I don't resent at all the fact that I am doing this. I'm very proud to stand by my record and represent what I think a judge should be.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zucker.
Well, I believe firmly that the California Constitution, when it was enshrined for the right for the public to vote on their judges every 6 years, it was done so in order to be a check on the judiciary. And meaning that any judge who the voters believe is not performing to the standards, acceptable standards, such as being a guardian of public safety, should be challenged. I want to point out that I had no interest in running for judge prior to this past year when I heard Brooke Jenkins, the DA, say, I'm having some problems with some judges. And to me, that was just incomprehensible because the judges I grew up with didn't act this way. So what we're trying to do here is have the voters look at the records and decide, is this judge helping or hindering public safety on our streets? And that's a very valuable conversation that we need to have. We need to understand the role of the judiciary. It needs to be more transparent. The documents are all paper files. None of it's computerized. So we really don't know what our judges are doing or how they're deciding unless you go down there in person and pull every single file. And that's part of the problem here is we want to promote accountability and we want to promote transparency in our system. So it's a very good conversation for the people of San Francisco to be having, understanding what their judges are doing and how the judges' role affects their lives and the public safety on our streets. So I'm very, very grateful to be able to be involved in this process. I too am enjoying it, like Judge Begert has said, and I agree with him. And probably one of the few things that I agree with him is meeting the people of San Francisco has been the biggest treasure here, and understanding their concerns and getting to know all the different various beautiful communities that make up our city. And really, we're just working to try and restore a great San Francisco, put great back in San Francisco. So thank you.
Terrific. Well, thank you both very, very much for participating. I think it's been a great conversation. I want to thank all of the attendees. So I'm now going to stop the recording and wish you all a pleasant evening.
Thank you.
You're really good at this.
Thank you very much. I
You
appreciate
should do
it.
this as a career.
Well, I'm going to have a stiff drink now.
Well, what is your career?
Well, we'll talk later. Thanks so much. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.